The vast majority of these books are by Irish authors, and I do not think that that's a coincidence. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am taking you through all of the books that I've read in 2025 that have gotten a 5-star rating from me. I feel like my 5-star ratings have increased in the last couple of years. There were times that I gave out maybe like 2 or 3 across an entire year stretch, but this year has really pushed the boat out. Up to this point in 2025, I have rated 10 books with the maximum of 5 stars. And I know that there will probably be another couple that are going to come in the next couple of weeks. But I still feel like if you are looking for something that you can read over the holiday season, this is something that is definitely going to help out. I'm going to go through these in chronological order, starting from the start of the year right to where we are now. And the first book that I gave a 5-star to in 2025 was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Now, this is a kind of a difficult book to read at times. It's about a young woman named Vanessa, who's about 30 years old, and she hears through the grapevine that her teacher, Mr. Staines, has now been accused of sexual assault of a number of students at her school. Vanessa was one of the students with whom Staines had had a relationship, and she is adamant that anything that happened between them was consensual, was something that she wanted, and that she was wildly in love with Staines. When she gets talking to some of the other people with whom Staines had had a relationship, she figures out that maybe things weren't as black and white as she was expecting them to have been. I think that this is such an interesting look at power balances in relationships, at a student and teacher relationship, and just how much being groomed can program your brain and just how manipulative a groomer can be on their young prey. I think this is such a hard-hitting book to read. It is one that you kind of need to go into with some form of preparation. It really isn't the kind of book that you can just pick up on a whim, but if it is something that you are prepared for, this is one of the best books I've read in a long time. I also gave 5 stars to The Appeal by Janice Hallett. This and My Dark Vanessa were read as part of a series where I went back over the last 5 years that I'd been on BookTube and looked at the books that I had already given 5 stars to, or my favourite books from that year, and read them again. I wanted to see if these books would still have as much of an impact, or if these books were still as good as I remembered them to be. I remember vividly sitting on my reading chair while I was reading The Appeal, and I didn't get up for about 6 hours. I only got up to refill my water bottle, or to pee, or to get food. I stopped reading that book at about 1:45, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, and then just went straight to bed, hung over as hell. This book is set in a small town in England, and it follows the Fairway Players. They are putting on a production of All My Sons by Arthur Miller, and this production is also going to work as a charity auction. One of the producers, Martin, his young granddaughter has just been diagnosed with cancer. And they are running an appeal where they will get as much money for Poppy's treatment as they can. In the lead up to the play, you start to get to know some of the members of the players, you start to get to know some of the people behind the scenes, and there is a murder that takes place in the town. You are working alongside 2 young law students to figure out who it is that was murdered, who it is that is actually responsible for it, why it is that they did it, and who has been falsely accused and falsely imprisoned of the crime. I thought that this was such an interesting way to tell the story. It isn't just told in straight up prose, it is actually presented in the form of newspaper clippings, of emails, telephone conversation transcripts. It is such a gripping way to tell a story. This is something that Janice Hallett has done throughout her writing career. This was the first time that I had ever experienced it from her, and I was just spellbound. The last book from that video that retained its 5-star was Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. I always say that this is like if Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine and Room got together and had a baby. It follows Sally Diamond, who has always been a little bit quirky and in her own little world. Her father tells her that when he passes away, he doesn't want a big fuss, he just wants to be put out with the rubbish. And Sally takes him for his word. And when he does pass away, she just puts him into the family's farm incinerator. This sparks an entire media circus around Sally and everyone in the town coming together to kind of protect her from her past. Because Sally was adopted by the family that she had grown up with, and she didn't start out in the most ideal of circumstances. We also find out what it is that happened to Sally's birth family and where it is in the world that they are now. This book really will keep you on your toes. It is incredibly uneasy reading. I remember being out for a walk and listening to this while I was walking around and just having that feeling of uneasiness and a pit in my stomach the entire time. It's so phenomenally told, and I think it's my favorite of Liz Nugent's books so far, but it can be very uneasy reading. Another Irish author I've loved this year is Graham Norton, and I was hooked by the story of Frankie. This follows Frankie, and we go basically from her entire life right up to the present day. She tells the story of her life to Damien. He is a young man, also from Ireland, who has come over to London in search of work, and he is working for Frankie as a carer. Frankie has just fallen and fractured her elbow, and Damien is the person who's going to come in, spend the evenings with her, cook for her, clean up, help her get ready for bed, and just basically be there if she needs someone. Frankie tells him about growing up in a small town in Cork, about living with her aunt and uncle, moving to London, moving to New York, her marriage, the breakdown of her marriage, and coming back to London. I absolutely loved this book. It does have some really devastating moments. There are a lot of moments of grief, of bereavement. There is a part of the book that takes place in New York in the 1980s during the AIDS crisis, and this was just heartbreaking reading. But throughout all of it, Frankie has so much determination and stamina and just a more positive outlook on life than somebody who had been dealt the cards she had been given would probably have. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan is a novella set around the Christmas period in Wexford. Something that made this book so special to me is that I grew up quite close to Wexford. The county where I grew up is right next door, so I would have been familiar with when Bill and his family went to Waterford shopping for Christmas. Bill works as a coal driver and brings bags of coal to houses and businesses in the local town. When he is driving to the convent one day and bringing the coal there, he discovers some things that have really put him at unease. This takes place in a time where Ireland was deep in the grips of the Catholic Church and where the Magdalene laundries were rife across the country. This is where young and unwed women who had become pregnant were brought to basically atone for their sins. It was here that they would clean, cook, toil, and basically be put through punishment for having gone against the word of God. It's such a dark and black time in our social history, but it makes for such compelling reading. I am always so devastated when I come to the end of this book and just have no idea where to turn. Another book that deals with the impact of the Catholic Church in Ireland is Ordinary Saints by Niamh Ní Mhaolón. This is about Jay, or Jacinta. She is living in England and has gotten a phone call from her parents. Her parents tell her that her brother Ferdia, who passed away a couple of years ago, is in line to be canonized as a saint. Ferdia had been studying to become a priest and was actually in Rome as part of his study when he passed away while in a soccer match. This brings out a whole level of questions for Jay. What kind of an identity does she have anymore when she was brought up in such a religious family but has now become incredibly secular, doesn't particularly go to church anymore, and is living in London, away from her home, away from the influence of the Catholic Church? She is gay, she has a girlfriend throughout the book, and she feels like the life that she is living is very much not in line with the teachings of the Catholic Church. I thought that this was such an interesting book, but a lot of it just hit me home like a freight train. There are so many things that, having also been brought up in such a staunchly Catholic household, there were so many things in here that were so instantly familiar to me. When there were prayers that were being said at lunchtime, I was instantly brought back to being in primary school and saying exactly the same prayer before we would go and have lunch every single day. It was so vivid for me just how much this book hit. Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell follows Ciara. Ciara has been married to Ryan for several years and they have 2 young daughters together. Ciara's home life is a place of terror and of fear and of worry. Ryan may not be physically abusive to his wife, but he is emotionally and verbally abusive, and Ciara is at the end of her tether. She has tried so many times to leave, but one day she takes all of the clothes off the clothesline, packs them into a bag, grabs their 2 daughters and runs. There isn't really anywhere for Ciara, who is actually heavily pregnant with their 3rd child, to turn to, so she is forced into emergency accommodation. This book is set in around 2019 when the housing crisis in Ireland was just starting to take form. It is now 2025, 6 years after the book had taken place, and things have in no way improved. There are so few houses available in Ireland, particularly in Dublin. There are so many people and families living in emergency accommodation on a day to day basis, and the numbers are only climbing. I thought that it was so interesting that a book that had taken place so far ago was still so relevant to Irish life today. Admittedly, I needed 2 tries to get into Such a Good Couple by Sophie White. I think the first time I was going through a reading slump that I hadn't really acknowledged, but when I came back to it, I was absolutely hooked. It follows 3 friends who have known each other from their university days. Clara is completely overwhelmed by her 3 young sons. Annie and Connor have been trying to have a baby and unsuccessful in every way that they turn. And Maggie and Fionn are huge Hollywood starlets. Maggie and Fionn invite their friends on a holiday in Cape Cod in the US, and this is where strings start to unravel. 2 of the couples go through almost irreversible damage, and their lives are changed forever. And Maggie, who had been in the grips of an eating disorder when she was a teenager, is starting to show worrying signs that this eating disorder may come back. I was kind of plodding along through this book at the beginning, but then there were a couple of things that just really upped the ante for me. And despite having a bit of a slow start, once I had gotten to this point of the book, and then this point, and then this point, I eventually got to a point where I just could not put this book down anymore. Sophie White has a lot of contemporary books that I have really enjoyed, but I really think that this one is just the cream of the crop for me. I think I read If It Makes You Happy by Julie Olivia at the exact perfect right time. I read it in like mid-October or so, when it was just starting to get a little bit cold, when the leaves were starting to turn brown, and it was the perfect atmospheric read. This book takes place in September to December of 1996, and you are following Michelle and Cliff. Michelle has just left her husband, who basically told her entire family that he was divorcing her on the day of her mother's funeral. Michelle has come to Cooper's Hill and is going to take over her mother's B&B. Birdie and breakfast was originally left to Sarah, who was Michelle's younger sister, but Sarah isn't able to come to the town and take everything over until the new year. So Michelle has stepped in, somewhat reluctantly, and left her high-powered life in Seattle behind to come to Cooper's Hill to get over her heartbreak and also to keep her family business on the run. The neighbours of the B&B are Cliff and his young daughters. Cliff is a single parent, as his wife realised that small town life wasn't for her and heads off to New York for a high-powered existence. I absolutely loved the relationship between Michelle and Cliff. I found it so wonderful to read them kind of put their pieces back together. And Michelle really softened while we were in the course of this book. And as we get further in, we start to see her really come back to life. I absolutely loved this book. It also has got a really great playlist at the beginning of it. So if you, like me, are a bit of a 90s music nut, this is absolutely the book for you. My final, or most recent, 5-star read was The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I'd somewhat been avoiding this throughout the entire year. I think I put this on maybe 3 or 4 TBRs before I eventually sat down, had a word with myself, and actually read it in October. When I did eventually read it, I was so unimaginably annoyed at myself for having left it that long. The Housemaid follows Millie. She has spent the last 10 or so years in prison and has just come out. Things are not going so well for her, and she's at the financial stage of life where she is living in her car. She has been looking for a couple of jobs that are going to tide her over, and one that has caught her eye is as the cleaner for the house for the Winchesters. They're looking for someone who is going to clean and to cook and is also going to be a live-in maid for the family. When Millie comes in, she is interviewed by Nina, who seems like such a wonderful person and the perfect person to work for. But once Millie actually starts her job here, Nina's true colours start to come to life. Nina is brash, she is direct and to the point. She will say things to Millie and then completely 180 a couple of minutes later. Or will give Millie jobs and then say, "Oh, I never asked you to do that in the first place. Why is it that you've gone here?" Millie comes to Nina's husband Andrew to kind of find solace and to see if he is going through the same thing that she is going through. It turns out that whatever Nina is doing to Millie, he's doing it about 10 times worse to Andrew. And Millie and Andrew start to comfort one another and start an affair with one another. And this is when everything starts to pick up. As much as I enjoyed part one of this book, I felt like part two just took me on a ride. This is the first book that I remember in such a long time having finished in just one day. I could not put this book down no matter how much I tried. I was so enthralled by Millie and Nina's stories and figuring out how it was that we have gotten to this point, where it is that we're going to go from here, why these people are the way that they are, and how things were going to eventually come to an end. I was hooked by this. I instantly went out and got The Housemaid's Secret. I didn't enjoy it as much as I did The Housemaid, but I had such a phenomenal time with this book. That is every single book that to date I have given a 5-star rating in 2025. What is the most recent book that you've given a 5-star throughout the year? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me a star emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.